This assumption that the children will resent the parents is ironically the exact opposite of what I see in my data. These kids talk about being much closer to their parents. There are no disadvantages for polyamorous families that are not present in other families.
My name is Abby, and I'm the voice behind the Evolving Love Project. In this podcast, my husband and I deep dive into the topics of non-monogamy and polyamory, drawing from our experiences of being consensually non-monogamous for almost a decade.
And my name is Liam. Whether you're monogamous, polyamorous, curious, or anything in between, we invite you to join us for this conversation.
Let's begin. We're so excited to bring you this conversation today. Before we begin, we would like to invite you to follow and subscribe to the Evolving Love podcast in your podcatcher of choice.
We are a listener-supported podcast, so leaving a review, subscribing on Substack, or sharing this episode with friends, family members, and lovers goes a long way.
Dr. Eli Sheff is one of a handful of global academic experts on polyamory and the foremost academic expert on children in polyamorous families, specialising in diversity and underserved populations. Sheff is an expert witness, relationship consultant, public speaker, and author.
Her first book, The Polyamorists Next Door, Inside Multiple Partner Relationships and Families, was released in 2014 and details Sheff's findings from the first 15 years of the Polyamorous Families Study. Stories from the Polycule, Real Life in Polyamorous Families, released in 2015, was Sheff's second book and is an edited collection of stories from people within polyamorous families. Sheff's third book, When Someone You Love is Polyamorous, Understanding Poly People and Relationships, is a brief introduction to polyamory using empirical evidence to start the conversation.
Dr. Sheff has given scores of radio, podcast, print, and television interviews with sources from the New York Times, ABC News, and CNN to The Atlantic, New York, and Shape magazines.
And with that, we bring you our conversation with Dr. Eli Sheff. So, Dr. Eli, thank you so much for coming on the show. We are so excited to be talking with you. We've followed your work for such a long time now, and we've taken so many benefits from the things that you share and the different things that you talk about. But just to start off, it would be fantastic for you to share with our listeners kind of a background about your research and what you've been focusing on with your research these last years.
I started my research in 1996, initially focused only on adults because it's hard to get permission to talk to children in research at all from a university that kind of controls how people do research. And I don't mean control in a bad way. Like in the past, some psychologists and sociologists have done some pretty sketchy things to people in the name of research and have actually hurt people. So it's a good thing that there's oversight in research that happens, in universities. But they gave me a lot of oversight. They were very concerned about, polyamorous folks being potentially damaged by being outed. So they were very careful about not letting me collect identifying information of any kind. So I couldn't keep my respondents' email addresses or their real names, which at first was really not a problem when I thought it was just going to be just my dissertation research. And that was going to be it. And then when I realized that people kept asking me, how do these relationships go over time and how do they impact the children? So I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I want to kind of check that out and see. So when I looked for my sample, the people who had participated in my previous research, I didn't have their contact information. Like the only way for me to find them was to kind of put the word out in proto-online chat boards. This was the 90s. Actually, now, when did I start that second wave? Later. So yeah, mid 2000s was when I started the second wave looking for these respondents. So the only people who found out about it were people who still had contact with the polyamorous community, which means there's an entire
Mm.
kind of person who's missing from my data, more likely to be someone who was dissatisfied or unhappy or upset with something. So I think of my
Mm.
research as kind of the optimistic view of polyamorous families, that these are the folks who were early adopters, meaning they were already at it in the mid 90s. And they
Mm.
continued with polyamory. They had a positive enough experience that they stuck with that identity over time and are even still willing to talk to me. The research
Mm.
covers now almost 30 years of
Mm.
following these
Wow.
same families from a time when their kids were, in primary school or preschool, even, like 3 to 5 years old. And now they're graduating from college. They're having families of their own. It's been really interesting. So
Mm.
the kids in the research are Generation Z, the Zoomers, and Millennials. I don't know
Mhm.
if that kind of concept of those labels translates to Australia
Yes,
as well. Okay.
it does. Yeah.
And then the parents' generation is mostly Gen X and the younger baby boomers. So the kids are in
Mm.
this kind of blossoming into adulthood phase, and the adults are in this aging, middle aged, like starting into retirement, starting to have all sorts of, like issues around aging and partners' illnesses and death and
Mhm.
dying, things like that. So that's been so interesting to follow and see the changes over time with these folks has been fascinating.
Wow, how incredible to have, done that research and to be able to still be a part of, where these people are at today. I'm so interested, to really get into it and to talk about polyamorous families and the children. I know for Liam and I, we are non-monogamous parents. We've been non-monogamous for 10 years. We have our beautiful son, and it's so interesting whenever we share with people that we are non-monogamous. Any of the sort of pushback or worries always around the children. It's like, well, what does this mean for your son? Are you going to tell him? Like, is he okay? And, I'm sure, you've come across this a lot when you've spoken to people. And what do you think are some of the main concerns around this? Or do you feel like this seems to be one of the big issues in the polyamorous space is, can you be a parent and can you also be non-monogamous? It's like, there's this sort of disbelief that these two aspects of a person can come together.
And unfortunately, that has been a really common feature of life for sex and gender minorities of all stripes. Gay people face that. Like,
Mm,
how can you be
yes.
gay and a parent? That's outlandish. Well, obviously, you can be gay and a parent because people do it all the time, and they have been doing it for
Mm,
thousands of years. Like, it doesn't really,
mm,
but like it became a big deal, this thing that's been ongoing,
Mm.
much
mm,
like multiple partner families ongoing for thousands of years. And it's become a big deal
mm,
now that, oh my God, how is this affecting the children? Kind of like it's been affecting children for the past several thousand years, only now they have better
Yeah.
mm.
electronics. They have electronics at
Yeah.
all. But it is this concern of like, if you are unconventional in some way, then you must be
Mm,
Mm.
lacking boundaries somehow in some other way. That if you are a gay man, that means you are hosting drug fueled raves in your living room while your infant is trying to sleep in the next room, because of course that's what you
Mm.
mm,
do. If you are a polyamorous person, you are hosting nightly orgies in the kitchen while the kids are doing their homework at the table right there, like this conception that people somehow, any kind of being unconventional then means you have no concept of boundaries around
Mm.
mm,
parenting, which is patently false. especially with the
Mm.
kids in my sample that they report to me. No orgies, severe lack of orgies in their childhood, which is good. Um, and what the kids notice far more so than the adults' romantic or sexual relationships that the kids don't care about, don't want to hear about, hate thinking about, what the kids care about
Mm.
is what kind of attention they get from the adults. Like
Mm.
that's not what just kids in polyamorous families, that's what kids think about. Kids are oriented towards themselves,
Mm.
developmentally, like they are the center of the world. So anything that happens in the world is, of course, directly related to them. And so they don't
Mm.
relate so much as, oh, this is mom's girlfriend, as, oh, this is that fun person
Mm.
who brings ice cream. When they come, they will sit on the floor and play Legos with me. They will
Mm.
watch this video that my parents are so sick of. I watch it 12 times a day. And this new person will like sit and have fresh eyes for this mermaid video or
Mm.
whatever, this will listen to Baby Shark with me and be excited about it. Whereas the parents are like, oh my God, if I hear Baby Shark one more time, I'm going to pull out somebody's hair. It'll probably be my own. So the kids notice, especially little children, notice the gifts they get, way more loot. They notice that there's more people to
Mm.
play with and more people to help with homework. As they
Mm.
get older, the kids start noticing much more the skills they learned, especially once they move out and they're doing their adult lives. They notice
Mm.
the kind of emotional and sophisticated networking communication skills they have, that when they move away, let's say they move somewhere new for college or something, they can meet people and they've got the skills to make close friends who will support them
Mm.
emotionally so they can kind of recreate a network of emotional intimacy wherever they go, which is an incredibly valuable life skill.
Mm.
Another
Mm.
really important skill they emphasize a lot is their ability to kind of interact with all kinds of different people, that they can
Mm.
feel really comfortable in a wide range of social settings with people who are super different from themselves. They can still kind of interact and go with the flow. And
Mm.
the flexibility of being able to kind of meet new situations and
Mm.
kind of almost deal with the fluidity and the quick changes of life now, that's characteristic
Mm.
of everything that their generation is doing and facing, turns out to also be a really important life skill for them.
That's from just like witnessing, their parents having this like high level of communication and sort of self-awareness and all of the tools and the skills that are really needed when navigating multiple relationships, alternative relationships. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's also so interesting. It brings up this connection that, this misunderstanding that people have, with monogamy and morality. And like if you're non-monogamous, it must mean that you have no boundaries and you're like out of control. And I have had to explain to friends, when they're learning about this for the first time and they say, oh, but is your child okay? I'm like, no, he just has a very normal life. Like he's very happy. We're very happy parents. We feel like because we are non-monogamous and we have such clear, open lines of communication between one another as well, we have a very happy home. Of course, we have things that come up for us, but I feel like it's our ability to communicate and have difficult conversations that we have in the relationship space makes so many other things more, easier for us to deal with, as far as logistics and who's making dinner and who's picking this up and, the mental load that can come with having a family.
Yeah, and it's something that we see and we've definitely talked about with each other because our son is 5. We kind of look down the road and think, when he's very young, he really doesn't understand what's going on. He knows that we've got friends, he knows that we've got, people that we really love and care about. But as he gets older, it's something that we've been thinking about, how do we start to have these conversations? And I'm interested to know, when you were doing these kind of longitudinal studies, what was the varying experiences of how parents started to broach these topics with kids who are maybe getting old enough to really start to understand? Because of course, as you were saying before, everything needs to be age appropriate. You're not going to tell your five-year-old all the things, but a conversation that you might have with a teenager could be very different.
Absolutely. It really depends kind of on the situation of the family. If a child is born in, so they will probably take that for granted. That will be their normal. And at some point, they will realize that their family is different from other people's families. And generally in my data, that comes across as a kid having had a play date or hanging out with a friend and then coming home and being like, oh, parents, listen to this. This kid only has one parent or only two parents. Like, that poor kid, they don't get nearly as many presents. They don't have as much fun. Like, it comes across as a deficit on their peers' part. Like, this poor kid doesn't have the resources or the access or the fun things that the kid from the poly family does. So that just opens the conversation kind of naturally of, in fact, most families only have one or two parents, and we're special because we have so many people who love you and love each other. And that, that does make us special. Isn't that fun? And that is totally safe when you have no issues around custody or, another parent like having to kind of control the information. The challenge with telling kids the truth comes with then if they have to keep that a secret. And that's a burden on children to have to keep a secret. And it kind of cuts both ways, because if you have a very inquisitive child who doesn't kind of start the conversation themselves, like, hey, I figured out some people only have two parents. Isn't that nuts? If they don't start that conversation, but soak up the idea from society that everybody's monogamous and then encounter a parent being non-monogamous somehow, kissing someone else than their spouse, or, doing something, then if that child thinks they are holding a secret that the other parent doesn't know, that can be really damaging and distressing. So if you have an inquisitive child, who's like constantly, some kids want to look through your purse. They want to listen to what you're saying. They want to like see what's in your underwear drawer. Some kids are like that. Other kids are completely oblivious and really don't look for stuff like that. They just don't, they're not that interested. So if you have the inquisitive child, you might want to say, hey, kiddo, just so you know, your other parent and we have the kind of relationship where it's okay if we kiss other people. Let us know if you want to ask us questions about that. And then just kind of leave it at that. So deliver some kind of low-key information that kind of hints at there's more to this if you want to know. But just like, the important information here is that your other parent knows about it. You are not keeping a secret. It's okay to talk to the parents about it and ask questions. And then just let the kids sit with it. And if they have questions, they'll come to you. And if not, then you might want to bring it up again later. Hey, remember I told you, like, your mom and I, we can both like date other people. Did you have any questions about that? And if the kid doesn't want to hear about it, then allow that. Do not stuff it down the kid's throat. The challenge to offering age appropriate, honest information, I would say, comes when the family might experience some kind of hardship or discrimination from being outed as polyamorous. And that, unfortunately, is a very realistic concern. One of the ways that that commonly happens is if the parents are divorced and then one of the parents becomes polyamorous after the divorce, but they don't want their other parent to know because it could potentially impact custody and things like that. So they have to either tell the kid and say, don't tell your other parent, or hide it from the kid. And that really can depend on how old is the kid, how often is the kid around, how likely is the other parent to really try to sue for custody. If they are the most kind of intensive challenge to child custody seems to be rooted in what you were mentioning before, Abby, this kind of religious conservatism that this is not good for children, the assumption without any basis in fact, really, that monogamy must be better for children. That assumes that all monogamous families are perfect and all non-monogamous families are problematic. And in fact, I would say there can be problematic families across the board, and there can be awesome families across the board in all sorts of different formations. And just being monogamous doesn't make you good, and just being polyamorous doesn't make you bad. It's how you parent. And that's true of single parents and divorced parents and blended families and widowed families, or people who've had IVF, like it's
yes.
not specific to polyamorous families, but sometimes either ex-spouses or wealthy and religious grandparents will try to take custody of the children. If the grandparent sees their adult child having polyamorous relationships and feels uncomfortable with it, they may try to do an end run around and get their grandchild out of that situation. I've certainly seen that. So if the family is facing that, potentially losing their jobs, losing their housing, losing their professional relationship, something like that, then it makes it much higher stakes to talk to the child. In those cases, I recommend emphasizing privacy over shame, saying, how when we're at home, it's okay to be naked. Like, let's say you've just come out of the shower, you're going to get dressed, whatever. You can walk around naked at home. It's not a big deal. But when we go to the store, we wear clothes. If we go to school, we wear clothes. Like, naked is a private thing for at home. It's not because we are ashamed of our bodies or being naked is bad. It's just a private thing we do at home. Same thing talking about polyamory. That's a private thing we do at home, and it's okay to talk to these people, but these other people, let's not talk to them about that. So either the privacy thing can work, or concern for other people's feelings and well-being. Like, how sometimes we're at home, like if we drop something, break a dish or something, we'll say a word that it's just a word, whatever. You say it when you're mad or whatever. It's really not that big of a deal. At home, we're like, okay, yeah, you can say that word. But when we go see grandma, like if we say that word in front of her, it's upsetting for her. She doesn't like it. So just like she doesn't like that word, she would not, this talk about mom's girlfriend or dad's boyfriend would be upsetting for grandma. So we're not going to talk to her about that. Like, we don't say that word. Not that we're ashamed of knowing that word or that there's shame associated with saying that word, but We care about other people's
Mm.
feelings. We don't want them to be uncomfortable. And maybe that's not the entire truth, but it's the kind of truth a 7-year-old could understand.
Well, the concept of shame is really interesting, particularly within the familial structure. Like, if we're talking about the intergenerational discussions that are happening within families, we are very fortunate and very lucky that we've come out to our families, like our extended families, and they've been wonderfully supportive. But often that's not the case. And I'm sure when you were conducting your research and talking to so many people, you probably saw the full spectrum of people who'd tried to come out to their families, or maybe just the full gamut of reactions. What were some of the things that you found when talking to people about, how they balanced these discussions within their broader families?
That's a really good question. I would say most of them used selective disclosure, which is a tried and true method for sex and gender minorities of all flavors, of deciding, all right, Uncle Jerome, man, that dude, he's solid. He is an open-minded guy. He's cool. I can tell him. But Aunt Thelma, she is so judgmental, and she would be really, so I'm not going to tell Aunt Thelma, but me and Jerome, we're solid. Sometimes it's worth it to come out, even if you're not sure how the family will take it, because it's such a big part of your life that hiding it is becoming really painful or a lot of work. And for some people, their families are thrilled. They're like, fantastic. I can think of this one family specifically. Actually, these folks, it was a triad and they got all of the reactions. One of them on the excited side, one of their parents, their son had already come out as gay to them. And so they were like, okay, that's it. No grandchildren. So then when he hooks up with this couple that has kids, his parents are like, grandchildren! The woman of the couple, her parents were like, you're what? You're having a relationship with both of these guys. Huh. Okay. As long as you're happy, like, sounds like kind of a lot of work, but rock on you, I guess. And then her husband, his family freaked out. Not only that it was a multiple partner relationship, but that he was romantically involved with a man. They wet their pants collectively and disowned him and would not speak to him and cut off contact with the grandchildren, even like the entire family. They amputated that part of the family. 5 years later, they came back. His dad was diagnosed with some life-threatening illness and realized life is too short to be so uptight about this. And so the parents made, inroads. And so they're back in touch. But the dude from the Poly family was like, once your parents tell you you're not their child anymore, like that changes something. So even though they're making efforts towards him and he's happy that he was able to speak to his dad again before his dad died, he's not that thrilled with that. But some of his siblings were really supportive and kept in touch. And others of his siblings were like, you're dangerous. We don't want you around our children. If you're going to, be with your wife and another man, then who knows what you'll do? Can you levitate too? I mean, people, I don't know, attribute all sorts of wacky things to polyamorous people, that just because you want multiple partners means then all these things about you that it often really does not mean.
We hope you are enjoying this interview. Do you want more Evolving Love and exclusive access to 2 extra full podcast episodes each month and my full writing archive? If so, you can sign up for premium access at evolvingloveproject.substack.com.
You can also follow or subscribe and share this episode with someone you care about and help us continue to add more voices to the conversation here at Evolving Love.
So it seems like the difficulty that can come up for people with children when navigating these relationships, it's not so much the non-monogamy or the polyamory itself, it's just this influence, this outside influence, how the grandparents will be, how their relationships will be, the judgment. And that's something that, Liam and I feel really grateful for, because we do have the support from our family, and that really empowers us to be able to speak more about this so that we can share it and normalize it. And, Liam's mum at first, when she heard about us being non-monogamous, was a little bit nervous about it, had questions, wanted to know about our son, and came from a place of, are you two okay? Because I love you both and I love your relationship, and this feels a bit destabilizing. So please tell me more, because I don't want you to break up, which was understandable when she was learning about this for the first time. But I feel like, by sharing about it can help to, really normalize this. But it has been really interesting. Liam and I did go on. It's obviously an interesting topic, this parent who's non-monogamous. We were featured in a small documentary on national TV last year as being non-monogamous parents. And we had so much love and support from the people in our lives, but the online comments were just, people were just losing their minds. People just could not believe it. They could not believe that I'm a mum who is also open to going on dates and forming other connections. And, it was just, it's such an interesting thing. But it's also been a beautiful opportunity to share more with people about our, non-monogamous experience as parents.
And something that happened that was really interesting when we were kind of like trawling through these horrendous comments, and I kind of got drawn to it like a moth to the flame. Abby was amazing at going, maybe I won't read the comment section, but I was kind of reading through, and so many were about parenthood and the impacts on kids, and a lot of because our son at the time was 4 years old, and he was featured, non-identified. He was like, his hand was like filmed and that kind of thing. But all the comments were like, wait until your son grows up and then he'll hate you. He'll realize such a monster that you are. And it's really interesting with your kind of longitudinal approach to all your research. It's like, what are the conversations that you're having with the kids who are now, but as you said, having their own families? What are the impacts that you're seeing within these children of non-monogamous families?
Well, for one thing, they do not think their parents are monsters. Absolutely not. And they don't hate their parents. Some of them are mad at their parents for all sorts of reasons, rarely polyamory. What the kids actually find is that they can have these emotionally intimate relationships with their parents that continue into adulthood, because their parents not only will tell them the truth, but also listen to them and allow them to tell the truth. Like, the parents are safe to be honest with. And one of the big reasons the parents are safe to be honest with is that the parents can admit when they're wrong, which is coming directly from polyamorous relationships. Because if you're in a polyamorous relationship and you've got 3 partners, let's say, all telling you, when you get super mad at me, or, when you haven't had enough sleep, sometimes you take it out on me. Like, you get grumpy and you're tired and you can be a big jerk. And if you've got one partner saying that, you're like, whatever, wuss, But when 3 people are like, when you are tired, you are mean, you listen and then you say, I'm sorry about that. You're right. I am mean when I'm tired. I am going to go take a nap instead of bite your head off. Well, that trickles down into parenting, being able to recognize feedback, admit when you're wrong, and tell the truth to your children. Really goes against a certain very traditional form of parenting. It's like the parent is always right. The child must be seen and not heard, must just always comply. They're not allowed to have their own opinions or selves, really. And it's a very different family. The polyamorous family is much more interested in what the children think. The children often are allowed to engage in adult conversation, which later means they can engage in adult conversation with all kinds of people. It's really a positive thing for them. But this assumption that the children will resent the parents is ironically the exact opposite of what I see in my data, that these kids talk about being much closer to their parents than they see their peers who can't be honest with their parents. You know, maybe their peers have a gender presentation that doesn't fit into one of the binary categories, and they can't be that person at home when they're with their parents. The kids from the polyamorous families can be any gender that fits for them because their family is like, we love you no matter what. You go, you non-binary cutie. We've got your back, you know. Or if the parents are like, yeah, I totally screwed that up then. Let me listen to you now and see what you want. You're 23 and you've got ideas of your own, and I'm going to take you seriously and treat you like what you have to say is valuable. Then the kids are like, yes, I do want to be a 23-year-old that has a decent conversation with my parent who can, you know, treat me in an adult way that doesn't involve talking down to me or talking over me or assuming that I'm less valuable somehow because I'm younger than them. Or so, yeah, the kids in the poly families talk a lot about emotional intimacy is a big thing with them in their own lives, with their friends, with their partners, with their parents. And it makes a lot of sense coming from, you know, a polyamorous relationship style growing up is very focused on emotional care and discussion and negotiation and looking at, you know, oh, if this isn't working, we could do it differently. Like we could actually try something different. And for a family, that actually contributes to resilience, being able to flex and grow over time as circumstances change is a key element of resilience, family resilience, that these polyamorous families really have very strongly. In fact, I see them as really icons of family resilience in a way that a lot of people do not talk about. And I don't mean that they take a specific form and stay that way forever. I don't mean that as resilience. Like the relationship may change over time. New people may come in, some people may leave, but I guess one of the biggest things that contributes to this resilience is that the adults commit to caring for the children regardless of what's happening in their relationships, which is a key element of families. All families would be better if especially men remain committed to their children, even if they don't have sexual access to those children's mother anymore. Like just because you're not screwing mom doesn't mean you're not still the dad, dude. Step up. But so I see that much more so in polyamorous families than in cheating families or in monogamous families. Far more resilient and beneficial than the stereotypes would expect.
I'm often surprised when there is that pushback around comprehending a polyamorous or a non-monogamous family, especially when it comes from people who are, in a family of divorce, where there are multiple parents. There's and maybe the biological parents are not speaking to each other. There's disconnect, but there's, there are two homes, there are four parents. And it always fascinates me how that is a more socially acceptable situation for children to be in. But then people are freaking out when it's all consensual and there are multiple parents, but it's people are just getting along and the children are happy and they're with all of their parents at the same time and, able to have meals together. To me, I'm that's a beautiful thing that should also be celebrated and not looked down upon. If we can, it just baffles me. There's a hypocrisy to that.
Absolutely. And in fact, I would say that is the one advantage that polyamorous families have over other kinds of families. There's lots of advantages associated with polyamorous families, some of which are shared with expanded families or other blended families or multi-generational families, any kind of group that pools its resources, that kind of family. Those are the benefits that polyamorous families also experience. But this one benefit that other families don't experience is that if one of the parents or both of the parents falls in love with someone else, the family does not have to disband. Everybody can stay together. Whereas in monogamous families, generally, if someone falls for someone else, that is often the end of that family in that mode. So this kind of specific advantage that's special to polyamorous families. Ironically, there are no disadvantages for polyamorous families that are not present in other families. So they've got a special advantage, but no special disadvantages. And I have looked, partners leaving, that happens in lots of different families. People die, people get divorced, people just split, they disappear. Partners leave all the time. Stigma, which is something polyamorous families experience, society looking down on them. There's also no shortage of that for families. We have stigmatized a million different families: divorced families, interracial families, interfaith families, gay families. There's no shortage of stigma against different families. Single parent families, there's lots of family stigma. Any family disadvantage you could think of that polyamorous families face is a family disadvantage. Other people face that too. So no special disadvantages, but a special advantage, which I think is interesting. Again, not what the stereotype would expect.
I think it's really interesting when you talk about disadvantages because, of course, we're non-monogamous. You've been talking about this for a long time, and you're often probably talking to people who are almost looking for a bit of confirmation bias, and we certainly feel that way. We're like, oh, we're going to talk to Eli and hopefully she just tells us, oh, this is all going to be rosy and what a beautiful, we're going to run off into the sunset. But I think it is interesting because you've done such in-depth research, are there any negative impacts of non-monogamy on kids? Is it all that kind of beautiful, rosy picture?
I'm not certain that there's negative impacts from non-monogamy specifically. There can be negative impacts from the way parents handle it. So, for instance, if parents don't realize the kid is inquisitive and sees them kissing someone else, and then that can be a negative impact. If they feel like they're carrying this secret they have to hide from the other parent, that can be a negative impact. I would say stigma certainly can be a negative impact as well, other people judging the family. Ironically, it generally comes from people closer to them, not from strangers or even other kids at school, because so many children have multiple adults in their lives because their parents have divorced. It's really common for kids to have, mom and her new wife and dad and his girlfriend all at the soccer game. But sometimes their extended family members, their grandparents or their aunts and uncles, people like that, will put stigma on the family. And that's more damaging for those kids. Like the story I was telling you about the family getting cut off, that those kids' grandparents were like, we can't handle our son being in a same-sex relationship, a multiple partner relationship. We're not talking to you. That really hurt those kids' feelings, their grandparents treating them that way. So yeah, it's not without disadvantages, certainly. Another disadvantage the kids mention is household crowding. Sometimes when multiple adults, multiple people move in together, the adults are fairly aware of getting their own rooms and having their own space. And then whatever's left is like, all right, all you kids, we got the girls in one room and the boys in one room, or something like that. Like the kids kind of are the ones left sharing space and sharing bathrooms, especially. The kids are like, we want more bathrooms. We want our own bathroom. You get your own bathroom, which again, that's a big family problem. That's not special to polyamorous people, but the kids, don't like it. I would say maybe one thing that is maybe slightly more specific to polyamorous families, potentially also blended and or expanded, like intergenerational families, is too much supervision. Sometimes the children feel like they can't sneak out, they can't tell a lie, they can't pretend to be somewhere different because there's all these adults around and the adults talk to each other. So if you tell something to one of the adults, you must tell the adult the exact same other thing or they will figure it out. And if you're 14, you can carry that off. But if you're 8, it's complicated to remember what you told to, what you said and what lie you said and where you were supposed to be and things like that. So it just made kind of getting away with things much more difficult and they didn't like that.
You wrote a piece in Psychology Today, 5 tips for kids with polyamorous parents. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that and what those tips might be?
Absolutely. It was ironically from someone who contacted me asking if I had a blog they could share with their children. And I was like, no, I don't, but I will write one for you. So I was using things that the respondents, the kids in my Polyamorous Families Study, have said how they manage their lives. For one thing, they talked about asking questions. That they would get a little bit of information for their parents and they liked it when the parents didn't push it on them and they could come back around later and be like, so what did you mean about this or that? Sometimes months, sometimes years later, which is appropriate. As you grow up, your understanding changes. Sometimes you realize, when the adults say they're taking a nap, they're not actually sleeping. And like a 5-year-old will be like, oh, of course. Yeah, people take naps. I take naps too, But a 15-year-old will be like, you're taking a nap. Okay, So ask questions, talk about your feelings. Sometimes it can be unsettling for children. Generally not for children born into polyamorous families, but especially for children who are a little older and their parents become polyamorous and then talk to the kids about it. It can be a little unsettling for kids to figure out, oh, wait a minute, we're different now, like maybe we've been different this whole time, but I realize we're different now. And how do I feel about that? And so talk about your feelings, find people you can be yourself around, like find decent friends, basically. If people react negatively to you. You don't have to be their friend. Like there's a lot of people out there who are accepting and interested and kind, and you don't have to settle for crappy friends. And a way, so that was one of them. Another one was a way to choose or to find out if it's safe to be open with this person is to ask kind of a test the waters question. And the kids in my sample often would say, something about same-sex sexuality. How do you feel about gay people or trans people or something like that? And if the person you're talking to is like, oh yeah, no problem. I've got a trans uncle and I totally love him. He's fantastic. Great. They're probably safe to talk to. If they're like, no, those people are destroying civilization, they're the downfall of everything I hold dear, then maybe don't tell that person about your polyamorous family. And then finally, that it doesn't have to mean anything for them, who they are on the inside. Like parents making their own choices, parents having whatever kind of sexual expression, relationship, gender expression, whatever. Parents are doing their own thing. The kid can still decide on the inside, what do they want? Maybe they have a parent who's super into relationships and maybe they are aromantic or asexual and are like, I don't really want to do romantic relationships, not interested in that. That is legitimate. And the parents in my study are often like, yeah, kid, whatever sexuality you want, whatever relationship style, whatever gender presentation, like we love you regardless. You just be you. So it's not like the parents are pushing polyamory on their children. And children don't have to take that on.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Well, Dr. Eli, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so much beautiful insight. Thank you for the work that you're doing, which is just so important. And it's incredible that you can combine this great data-driven work, but also be so eloquent and intelligent and compassionate about the way in which you share it with everyone. And we really, just on a personal level, we really do appreciate being able to listen to you speak, and we know that our listeners will as well. But just for our listeners who want to find more of your work, you've got some incredible books out. Where's the best place for them to find your work?
I would say ElisabethSheff.com. ElisabethSheff.com has all the links, all the things.
Amazing. And we'll be putting that link in the show notes as well. And thank you so much. I feel so moved from the conversation. We would love to have you on the podcast again in the future. I want to just continue the chat. Thank you so much for your time. We are so grateful.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Evolving Love podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback and support fuels our passion, and together we're building a community of curiosity, kindness, and growth.
If you would like to show your support and are interested in accessing 2 extra podcast episodes each month, along with access to my exclusive writing, you can become a premium subscriber over at evolvingloveproject.substack.com. Subscribe, comment, and let's keep the conversation going.